Chair. Very much requested, actually through a colleague of mine, to have this discussion on the trafficking persons, and I've had the honor to be in the expert group drafting this particular ASEAN Convention on Trafficking Persons. But I'm not the only one in this room. There's a very nice gentleman at the back wearing a batik shirt. He's the chair of he's the strong chair of ACWC of Thailand, and he was also as an active participant in the discussion of the ASEAN Convention Against Trafficking Persons. Now, I was given by I would be very extremely thankful to the organizers for having me here to elaborate a bit more on the ASEAN Convention Against Trafficking Persons and how we can design an ASEAN community to eliminate trafficking persons. Now, I think what the chair has said already, that last year during the Summer Institute, there was also discussion on this particular convention. So thereby, I would not need to recall again what is the definition of trafficking person. But allow me to just share a bit on what is the trafficking situation in ASEAN region. This is not data that I compiled, but these are data that I would compile from open sources. And one that we can find is the work of the ILO. If you look into the worldwide illegal profits from trafficking persons, and one of the exploitation is forced labor, and that amounts to $150 billion worldwide. Now, and from there on, 2/3 of it is from commercial sexual exploitation, and that amounting to around $100 billion a year, and that is exacted from fraud or force. So again, there's the part where there is forced labor in the amount of commercial sexual exploitation. And the highest of use of forced labor is actually in Asia, and that amounts to 51 billion. So it is 1/3 of the whole worldwide illicit profit gained from forced labor. In East Asia, if you look at the report of the Global Report on Trafficking Persons from the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime in 2014, forced labor is prominent in the East Asia region, and it is a region where the country of origin of victims of trafficking are coming from. Now, there is a case study that was conducted by the UNODC in 2013 on the assessment of organized criminal groups involved in trafficking persons, and it looks into the CLMV countries, and the amount that was gathered in a yearly one on the illicit profit of organized criminal groups from smuggling of migrants accounted to $192 million US dollars. And from forced labor, you have an amount of 33 million. But then again, there's a higher number when you look into the sexual exploitation of women and children, in particular those women that are being trafficked, which the gains are around, the illicit gains are around 181 million US dollars. This is a study that was conducted in 2013. Now, bearing this in mind, the UNODC also came up with a feature on how to look at how the trafficking movements are going in the region, and this is in the Greater Mekong Basin. And it looks to see how from Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, and are going to Thailand. This is the issue that we have today in the early this morning of discussion of why there are certain numbers of people, of vulnerable groups that are being trafficked for the purpose of exploitation. This is the threat assessment being conducted by the UNODC. Now, the historical perspective of ASEAN's effort to combat eliminate or mitigate trafficking persons. This came about in 1997, where the ASEAN Ministerial Meeting on Transnational Crime decided to have an ASEAN Plan of Action. It also established the ASEAN Ministerial Meeting on Transnational Crime as one of the sectoral bodies under the political and security pillars now. And it came up with an ASEAN Plan of Action, and among those, among the key priority areas for the AMTC to look into is trafficking person and then also with regard to smuggling of firearms and so forth. Now in 2004, during the 10th ASEAN Summit, the leaders decided to have a declaration. And that declaration was namely on the ASEAN Declaration Against Trafficking Persons, particularly women and children. What is important about this particular ASEAN Declaration is that there was a cooperation between the ASEAN Ministerial Meeting on Transnational Crime with its dialogue partners. And one of them was to have a sort of a progress report, one in 2006 and one in 2011. So there's a report on how far ASEAN member states has achieved its means of implementing that particular declaration. And in those reports, again, the focus was still on the fact of the criminal justice response towards trafficking persons. Now, in 2007, during the 6th ASEAN Ministerial Meeting on Transnational Crime, a joint statement came out which requested that the SOMTC, or the Senior Official Meetings on Transnational Crime, would come up or seek or explore the possibility of having an ASEAN convention, a legally binding convention on trafficking persons. And from 2007, I think there was a standstill. There was not much work being conducted during the SOMTC as well, the MTC. But finally, in the 18th ASEAN Summit in Indonesia in 2011, the leaders again requested that the ASEAN Ministerial Meeting on Transnational Crime accelerated its process to finalize the Convention on Trafficking Persons. Now, during that time, from 2011 onwards, 2015, there were 9 expert working group meetings on drafting of ACTIP, and also the ASEAN Plan of Action on Combating Trafficking in Persons. And one legal struggle in 2015 in Bogor, Indonesia, which then was endorsed by leaders. Finally, if you look at the ASEAN Convention Against Trafficking in Persons, it was signed on the 21st of November 2015 by all the ASEAN leaders at the 27th ASEAN Summit. Recently, Thailand has joined the countries as the ratifying countries. It's been ratified by Cambodia and Singapore. And if you look into the APAC blueprint, because so far the discussion on trafficking persons has been focused mainly on the ASEAN Political Security Blueprint. If you look again at the on the paragraph that relates to that blueprint, is that on B.3.4 section is the 10-year outlook to see how we can combat trafficking persons would be to ensure the early ratification of ACTIP and also ensure the early entry into force of the ACTIP, because the ACTIP will enter into force once all 6 ASEAN member states has ratified this particular convention. Again, there was a call also that the member states of ASEAN should strive to ratify the UN Protocol on Trafficking Persons. I think from now there are 9 member states who has ratified this and 1 member state who has not ratified this particular protocol. Again, and then the effective implementation, if you look at the ASEAN Political Security Blueprint, will be focused on how to strengthen the criminal justice response towards trafficking persons. Also, preventive measures, including the need for protection of victims of trafficking. Now, if you look at the political security document, which is what we have in ASEAN, it's a bit different from what we have in the convention. Because then again, if you look at most of the documents from ASEAN, it's a compromise language. And again, this sort of language, you can see the priorities where ASEAN is heading towards in the way of implementing the ACTIP. Now, just a bit on the highlights. What are the issues during the drafting of the Arctic itself? One of the first main issue is that during the drafting of the Arctic, there are 2 states that have not ratified the UN Protocol on Trafficking Prisoners. And this is where most of our provisions related in the Arctic looks into, and again we have to take those members into account when we design the Arctic itself. Then there was the issue that this should not be the same as the protocol, the UN protocol, because if we have the same thing, then it's no use for us. So what we did was that it should go beyond the UN protocol. And I will explain a bit later where the Arctic itself goes beyond the protocol. And then it also has to have a regional flavor, the ASEAN flavor, towards effort in preventing and combating trafficking. And the biggest issue was between those countries that were the countries of origin and those countries that were the destination, the sending, the receiving countries. Now this was a big issue, and it was a big issue because we had many sort of arguments in relation to what the criminalization aspect would look like within the convention, how we are going to devise on the prevention, and how we are to look into the means of protection of victims of trafficking. Now, these are the major issues that came about during the discussion of the expert working group. Again, the key provisions of the Arctic, if you look into it, I think the most important one, even though we do look into the general provision, is the objectives. If you look at the way the ASEAN Political Security Blueprint looked at it, was to effectively slice criminal justice response. But actually, if you look at the objectives of the Arctic itself, it's very strong. It reminds us that the objective is to prevent and combat trafficking persons, protect and assist victims, and also to cooperate among nations in the effort to prevent, combat, and protect the victims of trafficking. Criminalization. Now, this chapter on criminalization goes beyond what we have in the UN protocol, whereas the UN protocol criminalizes the aspects of the definition of trafficking person. But this UN protocol goes beyond that. It also criminalizes participation in an organized group. It also criminalizes the fact that when there is trafficking, there's also the act of corruption because of, for example, bribery of officials. Now, it is criminalized within the context of the Arctic itself. Now, on the laundering, and also for the fact that the Arctic also calls for that states criminalize laundering of proceeds of crime, and also the obstruction of justice, which is to protect the law enforcement officials during their efforts to combat trafficking persons. And also prevention, it is in line with what we have in the UN protocol. It looks into efforts not to prevent victimization of trafficking, victims of trafficking, addressing root causes, and I think this would go in line with what the AAC and also the ASEC is doing, which is to reduce poverty and also enhance economic initiatives to those people that are in vulnerable groups, and also discouraging demand that fosters trafficking persons. And that is an important element, because in that sense, when we discuss between what are the sending states and what are the receiving states, then it means that there are efforts in the prevention area that those receiving states should prevent or discourage the demand that foster trafficking persons. Protection measures is in line with what we have in the UN protocol as well. It relates to protection and also measures related to repatriation of victims of trafficking, not only to the country of origin, but also to those who has, during their time, had a legal permanent residence. Law enforcement, I think one aspect that goes beyond the protocol is that it has one measure that helps law enforcement officials in mitigating trafficking person by having measures related to confiscation and seizures of proceeds of crime, in particular those that are related to trafficking person. And this is quite a landmark document when we look into the chapter related to the international cooperation, where it looks into efforts in extradition, mutual legal assistance, law enforcement cooperation, and also because of having the fact that in the law enforcement chapter there was a provision on confiscation and seizure. There's also the international cooperation where states can cooperate in the in confiscation and also disposal of the proceeds of crime. And I think one that I'm not too proud of is the final provision that relates to the review and monitoring, because this is an important element when we have a legally binding instrument, that we should have a robust review mechanism. Unfortunately, this was not reflected in the actual convention. Furthermore, the challenges in the effective implementation of ACTIP in ASEAN. During this time, if you look at the history itself, it has always been centered toward the ASEAN political and security community pillar. And now the question is, how do we integrate the effective implementation of ACTIP into the ASEAN committee? I think one that we can see, which is forward-looking, is the document that was provided for by the ASEAN Secretariat today on the Forging Ahead Together document 2025, which says, consolidate our community, building upon a deepening integration process to realize a rules-based, people-oriented, people-centered ASEAN community where our people enjoy human rights and fundamental freedoms, high quality of life, and the benefits of community building, reinforcing our sense of togetherness and common identity. I think this can be summed up when we look at the ASEAN Community Vision document 2025, which looks into the ASEAN political security community, rules-based community, enjoyment of human rights, and then also the fact that I think Ms. Bali has also highlighted comprehensive security, which now looks into non-traditional security threats. And then the ASEAN economic community, such as job creation, and that also refers to movement and skills labor, and also and supporting the poverty reduction. And I think today we have had quite a good picture of what the ASEAN social cultural community is all about. What I can tell you in a nutshell, and food for thought, when we look into the efforts of designing a community in eliminating trafficking persons in ASEAN, is that there are various mechanisms that we can go through. There are the three pillars. We have sectoral bodies that are dedicated in betterment of ASEAN, including in efforts to implement effectively the ACTIP. And if you look at the blueprint again at the ABAC, section C.1.2, it actually refers to that between those sectoral bodies, it has to enhance sharing of information through, among others, cross-briefing on cross-cutting issues. So again, AIP is a cross-cutting issue, and between those sectoral bodies, there is a need for that discussion on how to better the implementation of the ACTIP. But there's one problem when we look at this, and that is the overarching issues on movement of persons. If you look at the documents that we have in ASEAN, in the ASEAN Charter, it raises the issues of facilitated movement of persons. I mean, I think, Ms. Mel, you were right when we said, we in ASEAN use lots of big words, but we lack to identify what it actually means. Again, it could also be means that we compromise on certain texts. It refers to facilitate movement of persons of unskilled labor. That was highlighted in the ASEAN Charter. But then when it went into the ASEAN Economic Community pillar, it became movement of skilled labor. Now there's a difference. Now when we discuss the Arctic, in the document it says free movement of people. So it's coming closer to the words that we have within the human rights jargon. And that issue relates to, I think, one thing, the issue of migrant workers, which ASEAN has been a bit shy on addressing. That is, I think, in a nutshell, what my food for thought is when we look into how do we implement the Arctic effectively. It does not relate on how, if you look at the provisions, all we have to do is ratify it, have it implemented in our national legislations, and conduct it. But again, it has to work between all the three pillars, between the APSC, the AEC, and also the ASCC. The way forward for ASEAN is continue as what is provided for in the ASEAN Community Vision 2025, which is to ratify the Arctic, and it's early to enter into force. Further integrate the implementation of Arctic into the three pillars of the ASEAN community. It is more than just sharing of information or cross-briefing between sectoral bodies, but it also needs to base its work plan on cross-cutting issues. For example, right now, the Philippines, as a lead shepherd for issues related to trafficking person, is conducting efforts between how to integrate those work plans on combating trafficking person and how to work with other sectoral bodies so they would have a unified sort of work plan to effectively implement the Arctic and also its ASEAN plan and also its plan of action. And I think the most important thing is that we have something on Arctic, on trafficking person, which actually discusses prevention efforts and also efforts related to the protection of victims of trafficking. But the problem is when we look into the previous data out there, that many of them trafficking victims are related because of labor trafficking or forced labor. And in terms, this is where the issue of migrant workers comes into play. And it should not be resolved merely out of political commitment. I think in 2007, it became a political commitment because there was the ASEAN Declaration on the protection of migrant workers. But for a fact, right now, until now, we have not seen the product. There is work underway that they have set a timeline that by September or by next year, there will be the sort of an ASEAN instrument related to the protection of migrant workers. But unfortunately, the discussion has been, in a way, downgraded in the fact that if you have something related, if you have a convention on trafficking person that is legally binding, and then one you have one on migrant workers that is non-legally binding, then this is a question that we should ask ourselves whether that is the way to carry forward for ASEAN. Again, because we're discussing migrant workers, what ASEAN needs right now, and beyond this 2025, is the work that we have. What is our policy on migration and development? This is an issue. I think there is a global forum, a UN global forum on migration and development, and this is where I think most of our work would be conducted at. I think one of them that started out last year was a declaration that came out from the MTC actually, that relates to the irregular movement of persons based on the during that period it was transpired many of we had problems related to smuggling of migrants and also irregular movement of persons. Now again, this is something that we should have before the agenda of ASEAN. And in relation to a rules-based community at the ASEAN Political Security Blueprint, I think what we need right now is a treaty on extradition. Something that was called for during the first Bali Concord, which I think somehow was diluted in essence, but again, it should be revived. And this is an effort to showcase that strengthen cooperation between member states in the areas of extradition, in particular those to address the non-traditional security issues such as trafficking person, would have better means and better tools for the law enforcement agencies. I think this would be the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.